Welcome back to the New York City Multifamily Podcast. Shaun and I are very excited for our guest today, Mr. Avi Schron of Cammeby's management. Welcome, Avi, to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Shaun, I don't know if you thought about this, but we started this podcast, like 2 years ago, and bootstrapped it a little bit. And here we are with one of the largest owners in New York. So we're really grateful and excited to talk to you about the history of the family business that started in the late 60s by your father, Ruby, and you entered the business in the early 90s. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about what your experience was like starting in the early 90s, the change of the rent laws. I don't know if it was fate or coincidence. It was, I think, in 92 when the IAIs were introduced. But we'd like to hear from you about post HSTPA, some of the impacts on this rent freeze, on the tenants, the business, et cetera, downstream consequences, what you guys have been doing either inside or outside New York over the last handful of years. And I know you're a little bit of a techie, so I want to hear more about some side projects that you're working on.
I'm happy to be here, happy to talk about rent stabilization. It's something that I think about all the time, speak to other people about it all the time, and it's a big topic and it really needs to be addressed. And I feel having an insider's view of what really happens in buildings and how HSTPA and the laws affect both landlords and tenants. And it's important for the public to hear that not always is something that is packaged to be something that's super special and super great going to be super great. And I think we're seeing today that when they passed HSTPA in 2019, they didn't really foresee everything that could happen. And it's not possible for humans to foresee the future. So things have changed a lot, and we have to talk about that.
So we're in the background of a rent freeze. Are you more worried today than you've been in the past? You're coming from a 10,000 unit portfolio in New York City, and that's why your voice is so special to hear, because from a outside perspective, you have the most operational efficiencies, you have the most leverage with vendors. You could survive, in theory, better than everybody else. But what are you talking about in the boardroom? How are you running the math? How are you preparing for the operational deficiencies that come with a rent freeze and rising expenses?
Well, I think we probably are doing the same thing everybody else is doing. They're sitting down with their staff and they're sitting around the table and they're saying, okay, every penny counts. Because there is not going to be any increase. And although the increases were not that great, a 2.5% or 3% increase is not really keeping up with inflation. But on the other hand, it's all about survival. And since the math does not work at a 0% increase for the long haul, there is no entity in the world that could survive with unlimited expenses, unlimited increases in expenses, and a fixed rate of revenue. It doesn't happen. There's no entity. Whether it's a public entity, a private entity, a nonprofit entity, everybody needs to keep up with inflation. So it's just a matter of time before it gets bad enough that they have to change the rules. You have to survive until such time that things change. So everybody's sitting down around the table and saying, okay, let's go through every expense, line item by line item, and say, okay, where could we cut $1? Where could we cut 50 cents? How could we improve our efficiency? Do we really need to spend this today? Do we really need to keep the philosophy, which we always had, which is spend today a little bit more to keep it for the long haul? Instead of doing a 20-year repair, let's do a 5-year repair. It's less cash out of pocket today.
Right. So that's the key point. One of the downstream effects that the people listening that might be on the other side of the equation in theory don't realize is you'll do a patchwork instead of a 20-year investment, because at the end of the day, most of these buildings are way out of reserves. We went through COVID and people not paying rent. Whatever was in reserves has been extinguished. And that ultimately doesn't help tenants whatsoever when slowly the Titanic is sinking in all these areas. There's certain operational efficiencies, and I'm curious maybe what some of those line items are, because from my outside perspective, it's maybe AI and electric and HVAC. How much of a margin can you create there? Where's the low-hanging fruit? And then secondly, just unpack a little bit those major repairs that need to happen and whether they're getting postponed a little bit longer than they should because of these restrictions.
Well, our philosophy is to run the buildings as best as we can. As long as we have the cash flow to do it, we'll continue to do so, but we'll be more cautious. We'll negotiate harder with vendors, where in the past we may have let the vendor charge us a little bit more. We're going to go back to them and say, we need a better price. Mm-hmm. We're going to be looking at all of our electric consumption, our gas and oil consumption, making sure that all of our systems are working well. Insurance, going back to our insurance broker and say, is this really the best price we could get for insurance? Insurance did go up a tremendous amount. We've been hearing about this, but maybe now things have settled down. Maybe it's time to roll it back a little bit. So that's the only way really to survive, is to take a look at the expenses. Most expenses in a property are generally fixed by others. The only item that you have that you could have discretion on is repairs and maintenance.
Right.
And repairs, it's not really discretionary. You can't refuse in today's day and age to repair a person's refrigerator. They need a refrigerator. You don't put in a new refrigerator for them, you'll get a violation. And there's so much communication today that as soon as you do something which is deemed to be cost-cutting at the expense of the tenant, it's going to be in front of the public, which is not going to get you anywhere. It's going to cost you more in the long run.
If we had the mayor here right now, what would be, if you could only be granted one or two wishes, what would be the biggest mover?
So the biggest mover that is the least painful, let's talk about the least painful to anybody, is going back and allowing a significant increase on vacancies. Don't forget, vacant apartments don't have tenants in them. Mm-hmm. When somebody's coming to rent a new apartment, they have a budget, they know what they want to spend, and they know that they want to get something of value. If you present to them what you think is the right market price for that apartment, and it is well renovated, they'll pay it. So taking an apartment that was $800 and charging them the market price of $1,800, $2,200, $2,300, that is a significant increase over what it was. Mm-hmm. The basis for what it was has no basis in reality. It was not anything that needs to be preserved because there was no basis for that $800 rent. So the tenant advocates will say, we have to preserve those low rents. So if those low rents were based on CPI, inflation, operating costs, something that had a real basis, I could hear their argument. But we have such a disparity of rents all over the place. You could have apartment 2A at $800, 3A, $900, 4A, $2,200, 5A, $1,600. The rents are all over the place, and it's so arbitrary that you can't really make an argument and say, let's preserve the cheap rents. You want to preserve a cheap rent, come up with a rent that's fair to the tenant, fair to the landlord, and let it go and let them raise the rents. Mm-hmm. The reason why the rents are so low is because the RGB never, ever gave enough increases to keep up with the expense increases. So we have tenants that are paying $800. That's below our operating cost. They were living there for 40 years, and the increases that they got were granted by the RGB. That means the RGB did not really keep up. And this is across the entire city, this whole story.
It's the 60,000 minimum zombie apartment.
Right, but I'm bringing up a point that it's proof that if you rely just on rent guidelines board increases, you'll never, ever keep up with inflation.
Right.
Even though you had more than zero, right? Because for many years we did have more than zero. Mm-hmm. And we're still, now, take that to the next step. So what the legislators do, they said, well, we really like the RGB keeping the rents low. It really serves our purpose of being able to maintain a very stable housing. People don't get big increases. They get 2, 3, 4% increases. But in the 1990s, they realized that there's not enough cash flow for operating. So they said, well, let's go back to allowing vacancy increases. And let's allow the landlords to at least get increases when the tenant is coming on their own accord and they want to negotiate and they want to rent an apartment. Let the landlord basically charge a lot more. But we're going to incentivize the landlord to spend the money on the apartment. So we're going to have IAIs and MCIs. It's not a loophole.
Right.
They love calling it loophole. It's not a loophole. It was a practical solution to something that they really wanted to keep in place. They wanted to keep the low RGB increase in place. There's a better way to do this. Just go out to the index, pick CPI, charge everybody whatever CPI is. Mm-hmm. Charge everybody whatever the property tax increases every year. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a lot higher than the RGB. And that doesn't serve the purpose of rent stabilization according to those who are the masterminds behind it. This did serve a purpose, but they took it away. Mm-hmm. And they said, no, we're going to take away the vacancy increases. And still somehow you're going to figure out how to maintain these buildings with only RGB increases. And now they're saying no increase whatsoever. So the whole system now is broken and it doesn't really work.
What would you say, and I know this is just a guess, but what would you say to the owner that owns 10 buildings. This is their entire career. They're facing refinances where the value of the property is basically at par with the loan, because if you financed anything in the last 10 years, you've lost maybe 40 to 50% of value minimum, and even conservative leverage of 50% LTV at some point in the last 10 years, you're basically break even. And I know everything's circumstantial, but would you tell that owner to cut and run, or do you think that this is got to change within the next 5 years? What would be your prediction on when we get a vacant market rate reset back?
It's hard to predict when we're going to get it back because it's a very slow-moving process. It takes time. We're in this already since 2019. We're coming up to 7 years. In the last number of years we've had since 2019, we have COVID first, then we have inflation, and we have the rise in interest rates. And the pain is not yet great enough amongst the tenants.
Maybe that's the key here.
To be able to, right?
That's unfortunate.
So what does that look like? Because it's kind of this slow burn, right? Every once in a while, there's a fire. Part of the building collapses a little bit in the Bronx a year ago, but it's nothing big enough, so to speak.
Right, but it's not. It's not going to be a big.
How do we identify?
It's not. You identify because it's not going to be any single big issue. It's going to be a lot of small issues.
Okay.
And which may be big. For example, the front door locks are broken. The elevators are not working. There's no heat. There's no hot water, and it gets fixed and then it gets broken again. And the owner is not the one who is responsible. It's now by a receiver who is struggling, and the receiver knows that his job is just to see this thing through to the end, and then those tenants start realizing that they're not getting the service, and the receiver says, "Look, I'm doing what I could do. Call your legislator. Tell them that the system is broken." And when the tenants decide that they are in pain enough that they're going to pick up the phones and call their legislators and say, something is wrong here. You promised me that we're going to have utopia in New York City with very, very low rent increases, but my building will still be run like a Four Seasons hotel. Now it's not.
Right.
I come home at night and I don't have hot water. I can't take a shower. I can't give my kids a bath. I can't wash my dishes. I don't have consistent elevator service. The front door is broken and there are people hanging out in the lobby. What do I do? And now it's a group of 40 tenants in a building that are talking amongst themselves and saying, something's going on here. I called the landlord's office. He said, it's not his building anymore. He gave it to a receiver. I called the receiver. The receiver says, it's not his building. It's in receivership. Who do I call? Oh, let's call the legislator. So they call the legislator, and the legislator says, oh, you mean there's something wrong with the building? Write violations. So they write violations. 2 weeks later, they wrote up 40 violations. Right. And what happened? Nothing, because the receiver doesn't have the cash to fix the violations, and it's not his building, so he doesn't care.
Right. Rooting for the foreclosure of buildings is a long process of just disrepair. I always thought that maybe one of the solutions to just communicate to the tenants. I mean, I'm sure people would just rip it off the walls, but to put a tenant's bill of rights and an owner's bill of rights in the lobby and just explain, here's the operations of this building. There's no money anymore, and this is what's going to happen. If you have a problem, call HPD, but you should also call your city council. Call both. Call both.
That's it.
It's fine, but we don't know what else to do.
And I wouldn't do that in a building that has owners, because if you do it in a building that has owners, it's just going to cause them a lot of pain, because they're going to get violations when they don't deserve it. But a building that is no longer owned by anybody, it's in that
the foreclosure, the REMS
foreclosure. Let them complain to their legislators, and the legislator will then have to come down to the building. They'll survey, they'll talk to the tenants, and then it'll be one legislator, it'll be two, it'll be five, it'll be 10, and they're going to realize that the tenants are angry with them, and then they're going to say, let's fix the problem, and then they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and say, well, how can we fix this without causing us to lose votes by raising rents? Well, they'll figure it out, and they'll come to the conclusion that since raising rents on vacant apartments aren't going to harm their electoral base because they don't live in their district yet. Right. So then they can raise rents on vacant apartments.
What does it cost roughly on a per unit basis to run these buildings? The politicians basically make it seem like these are cash cows that just run themselves, and you just put every dollar that is paid in rent into your pocket. We go back and forth on a per unit basis, like what it takes, and I'm sure it varies depending on your R&M on a yearly basis. But how do you kind of think about it in the back of your head?
So what I like to look at is, instead of cost per unit, I look at the expense as a percentage of the gross revenue.
Okay, say more.
So in other words, when I started in 1994, I didn't yet think about it that way, but I think I look back, it was like 45% of our expenses, of the gross went to expenses. And expenses, I mean daily operating expenses.
Not mortgage, yeah.
And not mortgage, and not the one-time hits which happen every day.
Right. Yeah. Somehow we can't. We've never factored those in.
And that happens. One day it's the left side of the roof. The next day it's the right side of the roof. One day it's the boiler. One day it's the elevator. And so there are one-time expenses which are not part of operating. Right. Operating means you have to pay your insurance bill, your electric, your staff, general maintenance and repairs, cleaning the hallways. But then there's the stuff that happens once in a while every day. So now it moved up to 65 and 70 and 75%. The problem is that if you buy a building knowing it's 75%, fine. But it's been trending in the wrong direction over the last 6 years. It went from 55% pre-HSTPA to 75% today in many buildings in the Bronx. And my portfolio have buildings that have moved up to 75%, which means once you hit 100%, you have no more money left for anything else other than regular daily operating. How long will that take? It could take, I actually made a little tool. I should have brought it up on a screen to where you could select where you are today and how long it will take for you to get to zero cash flow based on inflation rate.
Right, and it's zero cash flow, even setting aside the mortgage, because there's a bigger problem here where the lenders, there's still a loan involved, and the insurance companies aren't going to write the policies on a known declining asset. I mean, we are selling these apartment buildings. One of the things I wanted to ask you was what cap rate using a 70% expense ratio on rent regulated you would need to start at today to rescue somebody in general. Is it 8,
cap
9, 10,
or whatever metric kind of just excites you enough to be like, screw it, I'll do it.
I think we'd have to look, you'd have to really sit down, and the most important thing to think about is when do you see the opportunity to be able to increase revenue again?
Right.
And then you have to survive until that time.
Right.
And that's what you have to think about. And it's hard to know.
When you started in the business in 94 and you started participating in the process to acquire the buildings, what were the pricing metrics back then? How did the transactions work? Was it one times revenue? Was there seller financing?
My father used to do seller financing. My father still keeps in his drawer some of the listings that I used to get from brokers. And on the listing, there was first mortgage, second mortgage, third mortgage, because you bought it subject to seller financing.
Got ya.
And there was no ability to be able to finance these through a bank. So each seller would take back a mortgage and you paid the seller the mortgage. But that changed with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the ability for banks to be able to lend. So when I came into the business, we were borrowing from banks. I don't remember how we calculated the price of the buildings. It was probably a multiple of rent still, like four or five times the rent. Probably it wasn't.
When HSTPA happened, it was like this, oh my God, the business fundamentally changed in a negative way. In the early 90s with the implementation of IAIs and MCIs and J51s, was it the same thing but positive? Did you know, like, all of a sudden, wow, this is like an unbelievable business, the math works, like, or was it kind of like, oh,
it was a slower type of concept. We didn't realize how it would affect the business, but I did know that investing back into the buildings was a great investment because we had the 140th on the IAIs, and that became a permanent increase. So that really incentivized us not only to spend on the apartments, which the math of 140th is a great investment. It's like a 20% return.
2.5% of your investment you get back in rent every year.
But it was an incentive also to spend money on other things, whether or not you received an MCI, because you wanted your building to be a building that was appropriate to receive a rent for an apartment that you just spent money on. So if I spent money on an apartment and I put in a marble countertop and a brand new kitchen, stainless steel appliances, this is like already around 2001, 2002. But my lobby was not renovated and it didn't look like a nice lobby. So even if I got the tenant up to the apartment and show them this really nice apartment, they're going to walk out to the lobby and say, I can't live here because I can't bring my friends into this building, even though my apartment is gorgeous. So now you had to go spend money on the lobby. And then you have to make a decision, at that time, was it worthwhile to go through the headache of doing an MCI for a lobby renovation where you're going to increase the rents on the tenants in place by 5 or 6%, a small amount, where you're really raising the rents on the new tenants a lot more, and was it worth the headache of having to go through service complaints and then going and fixing them? So in some of our buildings, we did not do MCIs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we just kept them existing.
Yeah.
And we knew that as time went on, people would move out. We had everybody's birthdays in our system. We had the longevity on. We knew that next year we could have 20 tenants move out who are going to have very, very low rents. And we budgeted fixing them up, $50,000, $60,000 a unit. We had to collect that cash and be able to renovate those units. And the tenants were so happy.
Yeah.
They were really, really happy
Right.
to move in.
And
now,
this-
now they're not happy.
And now they're not happy. Nobody's happy. These neighborhoods that you started buying in, this was not Riverside Drive, Fifth Avenue stuff. This was like working class
Right. It was working
neighborhoods.
class. What
were some of the neighborhoods that you started or focusing on early on?
So we were focusing a lot on Queens. The first building I managed was in Bayside, Queens, a garden apartment complex, where in 94, many of the apartments were still from the 70s and needed to be fixed up. So they were 20 years old. And we renovated them. We put in some new boilers. We fixed up the parking lots. 2-story garden apartment complex, stick built. Oakland Gardens. Mm-hmm. It was part of a larger assembly that went bankrupt, and Jamaica Savings Bank took it over. This is a very interesting story because the prior owner had started renovating it based on a decision from what was then the Conciliation and Appeals Board, which was the predecessor to the DHCR. And they received a very interesting decision. They received the decision that they could take a block of vacant apartments, fix them all up, then take the total expense of that renovation, even though it was kitchens, bathrooms, and refrigerators, spread it evenly across all the apartments and raise everybody's rent. So the rents went from $400 to $800. Mm-hmm. Then came 1984, where they instituted the DHCR rules, and they registered the higher rents. But when you went back and you said, how did you get to those higher rents? They were doing it under a prior regulation. And the DHCR found that they had overcharged a lot of the tenants. Then
they've been rewriting the rules
every day.
Then the landlord went and filed. The prior landlord went and filed what's called a PAR, petition for administrative review, saying you're making a mistake. This was done under a prior decision, which had a basis from the CAB, and they did it correctly.
Right.
And these tenants actually had received treble damage notices of $200,000 in 1984.
Wow.
So
I hope those are closed out. If they're not,
thank God they're all closed out. The building is running well. We managed to get through one by one, where they found the decision in favor of the landlord that nothing was done wrong and it was done correctly. But this is the risks that a owner of rent stabilized housing takes, where laws change. You do things one way. Look, the same thing happened in Stuyvesant Town with the J51, where they had raised the rents based on an opinion of the Division of Housing, and then there was a court, right, the Roberts case, where they had to go roll back all the rents. And we had to roll back our rents also. So this is part of, you make some money, you lose some money.
Right.
But on the other hand, hopefully you make more than you lose.
For once, the industry is at least fighting back on some of the DHCR's kind of rewriting of rules or reinterpreting old rules in a new way. There's a gigantic case that will have monumental implications to the market. Balanced Housing Solutions versus Letitia James and Ruth Vanasquez, I don't know how to pronounce her name, the chair of DHCR. And in the testimony that just came out this week from Woody Pascal, the former head of DHCR, he basically says in 2023, James and the AG's office were coming in there and basically pressuring them to change the way that they were making decisions and to say buildings that were substantially rehabilitated were not substandard, and basically just rewriting things. So for the first time, it gave me a little hope, because it's like people for the longest while weren't fighting back, and through the courts might be the only way to overturn some of the injustices that are going on. So just FYI to the audience, watch the developments in that case.
But I think the real solution is really, they have to really just take all the laws, tear them up, and rewrite them. Mm-hmm. Because we're living in the year 2026. We have so many more tools in our hand to be able to control rents, understand economics. Data is so much more available than it was back then. And you could really come up with a program where things are much more fairly distributed, both for the landlords and the tenants. Landlords are entitled to make money for the risk that they're taking. tenants in New York City should be able to move into a home and say, I could live here for 10 or 15 years. I could take a job in the local neighborhood. I could send my children to the local school, and I have the fear of somebody coming along and essentially evicting me by raising my rent too much. And that's really what caused the HSTPA, where that was happening in certain instances. Right. So let's take a balanced approach. Let's try to balance this out. What happens if the landlord does a really good job and makes more money than the inflation rate on his investment? Okay, that's his entitlement because he took a risk. Mm-hmm. Are tenants going to wind up paying more than market? No. And now in the outer boroughs, there is a market. And even if it's rent stabilized before 2019, we were never able to charge more than market. There was a market. There were vacancies. If you took a beaual apartment that said,
shelf
it was an upper shelf, and that's it.
Yeah.
Based on their income, based on the competition, based on the fact that there are other options out there. Even though there is a housing crisis, there's still apartments available.
Yeah, it's been 7 years, and the rent is significantly higher today than it was pre-HSTPA. But let's talk a little bit about, you're talking about changing and ripping up the laws. What do you think of the industry's lobbying efforts so far? Do you have an opinion on what you would do differently if you could wave a magic wand?
The only thing I would do differently today is really try to do what the successful politicians do, which is grassroots, to engage the tenants. Mm-hmm. And they're the ones who really have to drive this. It's not the landlords. Landlords going to Albany and telling the politicians that I'm making less money than I was last year is not going to get you anywhere. They've told that to me. Mm-hmm. Politicians say they don't care. Mm-hmm. They told me this to me in 2019. Mm-hmm. And they said, for the last 13 years, you raised your rents by 52% and you're making a lot of money. So now it's time to give back. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. But that idea is taking statistics and skewing them, because we raised the rents by 52%, but expenses went up by 100%. So we didn't keep up with inflation anyway. Mm-hmm. But the point is that what we could do is, it's really about the safety and security of the housing stock of New York City. And I think if everybody got together and said, that should be our focus. A government should be concerned about the safety and security of the housing stock of New York City. And that is not being done right now, because what they're doing is they're starving the system. Whether it's a single landlord, a big landlord, that landlord, it doesn't make a difference. It's a system that needs money. The money comes from private citizens to pay for this system. And if they put out a rule that says that the system must be starved in order for it to work better, it doesn't work. They're not approaching it from that approach.
Right. It seems like there's a lot of trying to work deals backdoor, right? Basically lobbying politicians, but not a lot of legislation. Do you think that we should be doing more on the legislative front? Like right now, I think the only lawsuit active is the vacancy reset one, and presumably there's going to be something about a rent freeze.
We'll see if there's a lawsuit again about the rent freeze.
You gave me a violation. I'm trying to fix the violation, but I can't get into the apartment, and you keep giving me violations. Why is that not a lawsuit? I mean, there's a million injustices that I hear about every day from property managers about them trying to do the right thing for the people that live in the building, and the rules are just set up against them.
So Lefrak brought a lawsuit against the housing court.
Yeah, what's the latest on that? Yeah, to process basically evictions faster. They're supposed to do it within a certain time period.
There was a law. There's a law about how
like 90 days or 100.
I don't think they got too far.
So we gotta start another one.
I don't know the detail of where it's up to, but I haven't
heard anything.
I haven't heard anything.
I mean,
but how do you start a grassroots movements to educate the tenants when, if you stick your head up as a landlord, you're a potential target by the AG? This is what everyone This is what everyone is concerned about, guys. The average owner thinks, "What is little old me going to do?" I mean, you're a big macha in the real estate community.
It's difficult because the politicians are beholden to the voters.
It's housing politics over housing policy. It's hubris over humans. That's what's going on right now with the political movement. And if anything, my only suggestion to those that are fighting the fight is to identify the enemy correctly, because I think we keep falling into this trap that, they just mean well. There's a group of that movement that does not mean well at all. They want to take back the buildings. Their theory is if you depress the value low enough and somebody buys the building for $500,000, they don't need to raise the rent on the next tenant because they bought it for so cheap. Not realizing that even a building for free, when you starve it of income and the expenses shoot through the roof and there's no takeout buyer or takeout lender or insurer, that the buildings fall apart. That's the false narrative. So I think through the judicial system is where we need to continue fighting. The fact that there's a freeze of the rent while you have the mayor admitting in the Pinnacle bankruptcy case that he knows these buildings are going to go bankrupt again because expenses outpace revenue. I just don't understand how that's not, dare I say, an impeachable offense.
Right. And to concur with what you're saying, even if the buildings were given to a group of tenants for free, expenses do go up. And nobody considers the capital that needs to be spent in order to maintain these buildings. And it's hard for tenants to come up with big blocks of money. What a lot of the tenant advocates are missing is that the big blocks of money came from the equity that was built up within the value of the building, where the landlord took out the equity in the form of debt and then took the money and put it back into the building to make those needed repairs. Some of that equity came out and went into to another investment, to buy another building, which is fine. That's the business plan. But without that mechanism of being able to release the equity from the property, there's nowhere to generate large chunks of cash. You need a new boiler for a building. It's $250,000. You have a 40-unit building. How are the tenants going to raise $250,000 to all of a sudden put into the new boiler? Now, if they're structured properly economically, somebody's going to sit down and say, well, the building is 90 years old. It's going to need all of this capital over the next 5 to 7 years because you could predict it. Mm-hmm. And you can say it's going to need a new roof, new windows, new boiler, new elevator. It's going to need new sidewalks in front because the trees are going to lift up the slabs and then you're going to have lawsuits. It's going to need parapet work. Okay, take over the building for free, but put $2 million into an account in order to make sure that you could maintain the capital on the building. Are they doing that? I haven't heard that.
Look, if you're out there and you would like to donate a building to Survivor, New York City Rent Regulated, I think that might be the biggest reality TV show that we can come up with to help educate the consumers. Here's the building for free. We're going to watch you. You can't get any more handouts. See how long until you're broken and you're out of money.
Right.
This should be a TV show.
And there's another huge problem with giving the building over to the tenants. How do you deal with the disparity of rents?
Right, correct. Then they're going to be like, "Why are you paying?"
Yeah, maybe that's what the industry should do, and to create a little
publish the rents in every building and just show, "Hey, this is how unfair this is to you."
So for us as a landlord, we keep the rents private. This one is paying $800. That one is paying $2,200. At the end of the day, there's enough cash flow to be able to maintain the building. But if they own the building and they're all sitting around the table, 40 tenants in the room, and "You're paying $800, I'm paying $2,500."
Yeah.
That's not fair.
That's not fair. And the discrepancy is even greater. The better the neighborhoods, the discrepancy is huge. We have a building we're selling downtown, a small building, but one unit is stabilized and the other is free market. Identical apartments. One, the rent is, I think, like $1,500 rent stabilized. The other is $11,000.
Wow.
Same apartment. It's like Tribeca. It's like, oh my God. I wonder what the two of them, if they would meet in the hallway and they shared information, like what that conversation would be like. But
pivot a little bit to how you pivoted. So just tell us a little bit about what's one of the more exciting ventures you've done out of state. Is there any particular region that's been outperforming your expectations outside of New York?
So it's all cyclical. We do have a portfolio in New Jersey where when we bought it about 25 years ago, it was not performing that well. Mm-hmm. Over time, it started performing better. Mm-hmm. As HSTP came into play, where at that time, prior to HSTPA, New York was really performing well. New Jersey was not, but then it flipped around, and New Jersey started performing a little bit better. Now it's slowing down again. There happens to be nationwide a vacancy crisis. Rents are being depressed in certain states also. So it's all cyclical. It goes up, it goes down. There was nothing as good as New York City rent stabilized when we were able to buy it based on the rent roll that was in place. So you're buying a building cheaper. And then making the investment afterwards by IAIs and raising the rents, that was a nice investment. And that created the ability to create a really stable building. New Jersey doesn't have it that much. Most of the rents are pretty much even. but the rents go up by inflation, and over time it increases it. But it's nice.
So one of the things I'm hearing you say is if you're a New York City owner, you should have done this before, but time is never too late to diversify a little bit outside of New York, because things are cyclical, and whether it's industrial or multifamily or different pockets, you kind of have to be plugged in a little bit to anything. And if anything, this has just shown that you don't want to have too much concentration risk in one place, especially a place that's getting strong, because as soon as it gets strong, then they try to control it. What about the financial district? You decided to go residential with your office building?
What we did was we wanted to lock in the 467M prior to June 2026. So we pulled permits on the buildings. And we figured we'll wait and see what happens. It happens to be from the time we started the process till today, the commercial market changed dramatically.
Would you say it's Class B office?
Yeah, we have Class B, Class C.
The rents there and the
rents are starting to move
are going up. So you're like, oh, maybe I don't need to convert.
Right. So although cash flow wise, you'll make a lot more money from converting, but it's a big investment and a lot of risk. So maybe just leave it alone and we'll see what happens. So we spend some money on the permits. I think we'll wait and see.
The rents are like, what I would guess 35 to 40.
We're moving already to 40, 45, 50, 52.
And then if you converted to apartments, they'd be $100.
It'd be $100. But in order to get $100 a square foot, you have to invest $400 a foot.
Right.
So your yield on capital is going to be around the same. You'll wind up with the same 6.5, 7 cap. Although for the long run, residential buildings have some value to them because the cap rate for residential today is definitely better than office buildings. You don't have to maintain the buildings. You don't have to do the TI all the time, every 5 to 7 to 10 years. But what we've done in the past, which was a mistake, in one instance, was we took a building that had good cash flow and we said, we're going to develop this into residential. And we emptied it out. And it was just so painful because it was a good building that had tenants and it was cash flowing. And we realized that it's not good to do that. You want to redevelop something, take something that is not working, redevelop it. Something that's working, let it work, let it be. You can invest your money somewhere else.
What about Coney Island? You've recently completed a major 499 unit complex there. Did the rents that you're getting, I mean, this is luxury stuff.
You built this?
We built this together with Ryback. Great guy, good builder, a lot of amenities. And the tenants are happy. They're moving in. They're moving in at expected rents. It's cheaper than you get in North Brooklyn. So in North Brooklyn, you're paying $85, $90, $95 a foot. We could do it at $55 a foot, and you get more amenities.
And are most of the tenants that live in this building, do they work in Manhattan or do they work in the local Southern Brooklyn?
I think they work in local Southern Brooklyn. The trip to Manhattan from that part of Brooklyn is an hour on the F train. Maybe one day the government will reinstate the F Express. There is a third rail on the F line, which used to be an express line, and they stopped that in the 1970s. If they reactivated it, it would help the whole Southern Brooklyn because it would cut 20 minutes off.
Right. That's another way to increase affordability throughout the city is make the transit times quicker.
Right.
You know, East New York is right there. Speed it up. Southern Brooklyn's right there. Speed it up. And then people don't need to live in the close proximity to Manhattan, pay $8,500 a month in rent.
Right. What we need government for is to do these things. Make sure that we can get to where we need to go, good transportation, make sure the streets are clean, make sure we have a good police force to keep the city safe, make sure we have a good fire department and good schools. And if the government took care of those 5 things, the city would be a great city. All the other stuff that they do, that they get involved with, doesn't make the city better as a whole for the general population. Yeah, there are individuals that need help and they're focused on helping them, but sometimes that hyper focus on single individuals takes away from the benefit of the community as a whole, and the community as a whole suffers. And really, if you would just not hyper focus on the individual, focus on the community at large and do what's best for the community, those individuals that need the help, they'll get the help somehow.
Right.
Ooh, I like that.
You need to run for office.
I was just thinking, what position are you running for and when?
Please. Let's
work towards wrapping up here. Before we started recording, you were showing me a new tech product that you developed.
Naki.
Right.
Tell us about Naki.
In my community, we're very wary of the media that is being consumed by our children. We don't want our children on social media. We don't want our children just consuming any production that is out there, because a lot of it has agendas, a lot of it is inappropriate, a lot of it, the language is inappropriate, the content is inappropriate. We have a pretty clear idea of how we want our children educated. So for example, my children don't have smartphones at all.
You get in touch with them through carrier pigeon?
Yeah. My older children have what we call a dumb phone, which is a talk-only phone.
And so what does
my son, who is 16, does not have a cell phone. He does not carry one.
How does he deal with that? Does he have a hard time at school or anything like that?
Doesn't have a hard time at school because none of his friends have phones. It's a culture that, as parents, we sort of promote together with the school, and it works. And the kids, they're happy.
So what does Naki do?
So Naki is an audio device for audio only, no video. It's a tabletop device that the content is curated by individuals that are sensitive to the content that we know that the parents who are buying this device would want their children to listen to.
Right.
It could even be curated further by filtering on our portal. And it's something that's very popular because it has great stories, great music, but none of the music will find an appropriate language. And in fact, even the style of music is limited to the type of music that is more soulful. Even if it's a faster music, it may be a faster soulful music. Right. It's not the hard rock where it just somehow it lends your physical body to want to just break loose.
This is content that you or Naki uploads. It's not Spotify or Apple where I can go search for whatever I want, like put it on an iPod.
Right. It must be uploaded to our service.
Got it. So the person who buys it doesn't influence what's on it. They just kind of scroll through whatever is provided.
That's right.
Got it. Right. Got it. And so how does it work? You guys meet once a month and talk about, I heard this great story. Let's put it on, like this book, children's books.
We have content production managers that seek out good content, good stories. It became a whole little industry unto itself, especially now with AI. We do a little newscast every day for 5 minutes, just to give the headlines for both adults and kids. But it's all AI. I do have a person who creates it. And people love it because it gives them the news in 5 minutes. They don't have to be attached to the news all day and listen to everything that goes on out there. We have great kid stories. Some of them have good lessons. Some of them are just fun stories without any sort of lessons that we would feel uncomfortable with.
What do you read or typically listen to outside of religious affiliated stuff?
I like to read both the Wall Street Journal and New York Times.
Okay.
Because the Wall Street Journal is more business oriented and gives you sort of the straight approach. The New York Times tells me what everybody else is going to be thinking about.
Right. Yeah, you need to know what the tenants are basically going to get into with.
So, although I don't necessarily subscribe to their philosophy and their views, but it's good to know what everybody's thinking.
Yeah. How do you deal with stress?
So this is a little bit of a longer answer. Coming from a religious background, something that we are taught from when we're young is that we rely on God for our daily sustenance. And we believe that he created the world and he continues to be involved in every detail of everybody's life. Now, the issue is when it comes to our daily life, it looks like that we're in control. But if you could believe that, yes, we have an obligation to try to do our hardest to do that which he wants us to do, which is go out and earn a living, raise our family, do what we want. But on the other hand, the end result is not necessarily going to be exactly the way we want it. It's going to be what he wants. So it takes away the stress. I tried my hardest. How many times have you called a client and you thought you had a deal and the deal fell through? And then how many times have you called a client when you said, this is not happening, and you made a lot of money from it? The world was a world that is run purely on science. Everything should be mathematical. The more effort you put in, the more money you make. The smartest people should always make the most money. The professors in college who teach economics and know economics the best should always be the richest. And the guy in class who was the dumb guy who not dumb, but the guy who was sort of off a little bit, he should be the poorest. And it doesn't work that way. Why doesn't it work that way? Because God is running the world and he's making it look confusing and making it. So sometimes we run into a situation where we say, what's going on? And we say, God's running the world. I did what I could. I put in my effort. I tried my hardest. I'm going to continue to try my hardest. But if it doesn't go my way, I don't have to worry because he's in charge and we don't know where things are going to go.
I like that.
I love that.
I always had a client say, just when I would get stressed out about deals, he's like, look, every deal is a movie. Sometimes it's a comedy, sometimes it's a drama, sometimes it's a horror. There's different characters, but it's just a film. And just watch it and experience it, and then you're gonna watch it. You're gonna pick up a different movie the next deal.
And
that's the fun part about the business for us. Every deal is different, and you have 2 new people on every transaction.
Right.
And so it's fun. It's interesting. It keeps it not mundane.
Take that approach to life in general.
Right.
Where it's very easy to get stressed out from life because we have a 24-hour news cycle and there's always something going on that's bad. Mm-hmm. Nobody reports on good news, right? They don't say, the lady got helped cross the street and she arrived on the other side safely. Nobody reports on that, right? They're going to report on the guy who pushed her into the street and got hit by a car, right? So life could be stressful. But on the other hand, take a step back and you say, there's somebody running the world. I'm going to sit back and watch this movie. And it's a very fascinating movie. Watching what happened from Obama to Biden to Trump, right? To Iran, to the war, to Israel. It happens to be, it's fascinating because nobody would have thought that this could actually play out in our life. And it doesn't really make much sense.
Our other partner, Joe, he's asked me recently, over the last year or so, he's like, why do you you're in such a good mood. You're so happy. What's going on? And I told him this is good advice. I forget where I read this. Happiness is a choice.
Right.
I think we also told you to stop being too negative on the podcast.
Is that what it is? Well, you walk around with a pout on your face. I know your secret word is Elmo. If you ever walk into him and he's grouchy, you just say Elmo and the stress leaves him.
So just to leave off with some positive, the fact that we have a 0% rent increase is going to accelerate the next step, right? Everything is a step. So what Mamdani did for us is, in a way, he did us a favor because had we remained with a low RGB increase, the suffering would have gone on much longer. But he's accelerating the next step. The next step has to happen a lot faster now. We don't know what that's going to be, how it's going to happen, but it's going to be faster.
That's what I'm looking forward to. Last question before I let you go, because I have you. Your father is notoriously reclusive, Ruby. What's one thing that you can share with the audience about him that nobody would know, or that's like a funny quirk or something silly, like an inside joke that he wouldn't mind you sharing? When
people come up to the office, I like to show people the chair that he sits on. You would think an executive of such an empire should have a chair that costs, really comfortable, thousands of dollars. Yeah. He sits on a wooden folding chair.
Wow.
Because why? Because for him, it's more comfortable. That's what he likes to sit on. It's better for the back.
How old is that chair?
I don't know, probably 40 years old.
Wow. Well, I hope to come to your office one day and observe this chair.
Yeah. Avi, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
This was really fun.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Great.